when you looked at the rate of occurrence of this very specific birth defect over time.
Thalidomide was the common denominator in these births.
It was obvious that, one was leading to the other. There was overwhelming evidence.
Everybody knew, Germany knew, Australia knew just how much damage this drug had done.
You try not to blame yourself. It was your fault, but it wasn't really. You wonder what made you swallow the bloody pill.
It turned out to be a very deliberate decision by the Irish state not to issue a warning to the public.
Ireland left thalidomide on the shelves of pharmacies.
If they took it off the market in the 30th of November 1961, I'd be all right. But they left it on the market.
They need a radically different kind of compensation. They need it fast and they need it to be generous.
And the government needs to face this again.
We're in limbo. No apology, no acknowledgement, no healthcare package. Zero.
The state always looks after the state. There's a permanent civil service there for one reason and one reason only. That's to protect the state, not the citizens. They have no interest in the citizens.
They were robbed. They really were. They were robbed of so much. It's total betrayal.
It's quite extraordinary to see the weight they have put behind their defence. And it does beg the question, why?
That's you, isn't it? Yeah. Looks like me. Yeah. She was my third baby. You hoped everything would go all right. And you go to see the doctor. You think everything's going to be perfect. I go to the same gynecologist because she had been so good with the previous two babies. When Sharon was born, she came over and showed me, I don't know what's wrong here, what's happened. And she showed me that the baby's wrist was out of place. And she examined the rest of it. She said, perfect otherwise, though. But this is the only thing you can get it looked after. So that was the first indication I had that anything was wrong. You felt so sorry for the baby rather than yourself. Just say, I'm going to have to help the baby. Do all I can for her. But it took us years to emerge what really had caused the damage. It was a pill I had taken, one pill, one night, because I thought I was getting a cold. And my husband had come back with some packet of pills he got in the pharmacy, and he said, the pharmacist said, this is a great pill. If you want to sleep or anything, it'll cure everything nearly, cure all. I just took one, that one.
Thalidomide was developed by a German company called Chemie Grunenthal. They had been a soap and perfume manufacturer before the war. And after the war, there was a lot of demand for antibiotics, penicillin specifically. So lots of companies manufactured penicillin under license from the occupying Allied forces. And as profits dropped, as more companies started making penicillin, they looked for other commercial opportunities. And in 1954, they got a patent for thalidomide. And they set about trying to find a disease that they could treat with this new drug. In some of their early human trials, they spotted that it was associated with restful sleep. The available sedatives on the market were barbiturates. And barbiturates, if you take too much of them, cause respiratory depression or essentially stop you from breathing. So they were associated with lots of deaths in overdose, particularly when combined with alcohol. So Chemie Grunenthal saw that they had a potentially massive drug on their hands because it didn't seem to be dangerous in overdose in their initial studies in animals, and from human experience later on, it seemed to be safe at very high doses. It was sold in up to 50 countries. It was a massive commercial success for Chemie Grunenthal.
It was a magic bullet drug. It did away with the nausea, the morning sickness associated with pregnancy. And also it allowed women to sleep when they were pregnant. It was fantastic. And then this obstetrician in Australia, he was very enthused about it. A medical rep had come to him and he told him all the wonders of this. So he used it with his patients. And then within an astonishingly short period of time, 3 babies were born who died and who were maimed in spectacular ways. And because they were his patients, because it happened so quickly together, he said, no, there's something badly wrong here. And he was the first to point to the danger of thalidomide. And then another medic experienced the same thing, noticed the numbers of disfigured children.
The evidence, when you looked at the rate of occurrence of this very specific birth defect over time, and when you superimpose that on the sales of thalidomide, it was obvious that, one was leading to the other. There was overwhelming evidence.
I had just joined RTE at the time, and the team I was with, which was the Sunday programme, radio Sunday programme in the middle of the day, asked me to go and investigate this. And, oh God, when you think of the luxury of it, I got 2 months and I got a first-class researcher. She was an ex-nun, and she was tough. She was brilliant. It was the first time, actually, that I had heard about this drug that women took in their pregnancy, which was supposed to help them with morning sickness. It had begun to appear in small pieces in the newspapers. We went to Germany and we talked to the doctor who had noticed abnormalities in his clinic. He was a gynecologist in Hamburg called Dr. Thalidomide Scandal. And he was very worried about this. And he rang the company, who didn't want to hear what he had to say. And then he said, OK, I'm going to the papers. So he went to the papers the next day, who, in fairness, wrote it up. And then the company, Chemie Grünenthal, decided that they would withdraw the drug for further trial. Our main job going over to Germany was to talk to Professor Lenz. And when we went looking for him in Hamburg, he wasn't there. And when we found him eventually, he explained to us that after he had revealed the fact that this top-notch pharmaceutical company had brought out a drug that was unsafe, he was persona non grata both with the German government and with the very powerful drug companies. And he found it impossible to continue his gynecological practice in Hamburg. And he found himself a job in the University of Münster, where at least he was independent and he was able to say what he wanted. So we had to travel right over to the border to Münster to interview him. He was an admirable guy, and he said that he had rung the company up and he had told them he was worried, and he knew they weren't listening. They didn't want to know, and it wasn't until they were suddenly faced with the fact that he had now gone to the press and that people were asking questions that they did anything about it at all.
There was definitely claims made about its safety and how effective it was, and some of the marketing materials report that it was completely free of untoward side effects. Grünenthal wrote to up to 40,000 doctors in August 1958, suggesting thalidomide is the best drug for pregnant and nursing mothers. And then they quote a specific obstetrician as giving their brand of drug, Contergan, which was the brand of thalidomide used in Germany at the time, to many patients in his gynecological department and his obstetric practice. But what they didn't make clear in that advertising material was that these weren't pregnant patients, these were gynecology patients, or they were patients who were postpartum after they delivered their baby.
Chemie Grünenthal didn't want to talk to us at all. So we went off and we talked to Dr. Lenz instead. But, we knew they had overinflated their claims for this drug. And we also knew that there were people driving around the country delivering these as free samples to doctors, and that one of the promotional letters said that this drug and this pill was as safe as a sweet. As safe as a sweet. So there was something quite horrible about that. A sweet sort of thing a child would take, innocent, except there was nothing innocent about it at all.
I had told everybody growing up that my hand had shrunk in the wash. I'd fallen off a chair and it stopped growing. My father asked me to come up. He was unwell that day. I never remember Daddy being unwell, but he was unwell that day. And I can remember him saying, sit up there, and sitting at the back of the bed, and the headboard or the back of the end of the bed sitting, and I can remember the feel of it in my back. And he just began to explain to me that my hand was actually caused by a drug. And that's really all I remember. And then I remember it was the first time that I'd heard the word thalidomide. And I can remember going off and trying to learn to spell it. And I can remember, you know, the way in school we were taught how to break words down. And I remember writing it Thalidomide. And it seemed to take me a long time to learn how to spell it. But that was a game changer, Paul, and I don't understand why it was a game changer. It didn't change anything, but it changed everything. I just don't know how to explain it. That day that Daddy told me, it was because the following week Olivia O'Leary was coming to interview Daddy. And I had long pigtails and I sat at the end of the stairs, and she was a young journalist, went in to meet Daddy in the sitting room, and then I was brought in to meet her.
They were an extraordinary mixture of fear and pride. No parent wants to come out and suggest that the birth of one of their children is a disaster. Of course we don't. They were very proud of their children, and in many cases when I met them, I would meet the children as well, who were all bright kids and very much loved within their families. What I was conscious of was brave people coming out against what they knew were the powers that be. They knew that they were taking on a lot of prejudice and a lot of power, but they did it, and it wasn't easy for them, and I had great admiration for them.
You must remember, in Germany, it was second only to the sale of aspirin in the 60s. Like, there was 1 million of these a day being sold in Germany. Like, it was an extraordinary product. It was so money-making. It was so successful. The pharmaceutical firm Grunenthal deliberately chose to ignore different warnings. There were pieces in the Lancet that eventually brought them to heel that said the link between thalidomide and birth abnormalities. Thalidomide was the common denominator in these births. And eventually Grunenthal announced an international withdrawal in late November 1961.
The company, Chemie Grunenthal, decided that they would withdraw the drug. And at that stage, which would have been November 1961, they contacted the Irish government, who would have been the licensing authority, and they also contacted their distributors, Wheelahans, who also distributed wine and drink and all sorts of stuff. But what the government did was they left it to Wheelahans to withdraw the drug. And when my terrific researcher, Aileen O'Doherty, went down to Wheelahans to ask for their record and their copy of what sort of withdrawal slip it was which went out. They took 3 days before they came up with it. And then when they gave it to her, it wasn't one of the urgent slips, which were colour-coded, I think, red at the time. It was a different colour, which I think was yellow, which was a sort of lower level of urgency, the sort of one you'd send out if you were suggesting to the pharmacist that they needed to withdraw a batch because it was out of date. So that seemed to be the level of withdrawal, certainly for almost a year, 6 months or a year after the government knew and had been told by the company that the drug should be withdrawn.
I did some work with a politician named Dr. John O'Connell, and he discovered, hang on a second, everybody knew, Germany knew, Australia knew just how much damage this drug had done. And yet, after all that information had gone through, Ireland left thalidomide on the shelves of pharmacies. And John O'Connell never got over his rage at the notion that children in Ireland, long after they should have been protected by the state, were disfigured and maimed by a drug that the state knew was doing this damage.
John O'Connell reported that 3 years after the withdrawal, he was able to buy thalidomide over the counter in an Irish pharmacy. So the withdrawal was incredibly ineffective. And unfortunately, it's set in medicine cabinets as well, waiting to do its damage. And we know that some of the survivors in jurisdictions around the world were born well after the medicine should have been withdrawn.
If the government took the tablet off the market in November 61, I wouldn't have been affected, because I wasn't born in 63, January. So if they took it off the market in the 30th of November 1961, I'd be all right. But they left it on the market. And we think that the reason that they didn't take it off was because I was afraid people might go for abortions to England. But we have no proof of that, like. But that was Ireland at that stage, like. And the church had too much of a say. An Irish solution to an Irish problem, like I said a while ago. Things were just brushed away under the carpet.
My feeling was, these lovely people are up against a series of hierarchies. They're up against the hierarchy of the powerful drug companies who don't want to admit that they got it wrong. They're up against the hierarchy of government departments who don't want to admit that they got it wrong and who really did not do their job in the first place. And it seemed to me they were probably up against the hierarchy of the Catholic Church at the time, because the government excuse which was given was that the thinking at the time, 12 years earlier, was that you'd frighten mothers and that there might be a danger that they would miscarry or that they would have hysterical fits or whatever it was. After a while, I realised, of course, what they were worried about was people going for abortions. And if you think about it, the Department of Health certainly was probably the most Catholic department of state, because they ran the hospitals, they ran women's reproductive health, about which the church has always been obsessive. So the Department of Health would have been reflecting very much a Catholic point of view. Eventually, the Department of Health and the then Minister Erskine Childers agreed to give us an interview. He said to me that the then Minister for Health, who was Sean McEntee, felt it was unlikely that many expectant mothers would have taken the drug, and he did not want to alarm those who might have taken it during pregnancy. That the then minister had the choice of terrifying mothers who might or might not have taken the drug, or not terrify them when one or two mothers might indeed take the drug and bring into the world a deformed child. I was gobsmacked. I really was. I was so shocked. And I kept pushing it with them and saying, so you took the risk that a mother might take this pill when there was no need for her to have taken it, when there should have been a public warning. You took the risk of her taking that pill and that a deformed child might be born. You took that risk. And he was deeply uncomfortable, and he kept on saying, I'm telling you what the thinking was at the time in the Department of Health. I'm not saying to you that that's what my thinking would be now, or that it is what I now would have done as Minister for Health. He was obviously deeply uncomfortable at what had happened and at the sort of excuse that he was trying to give.
The state always looks after the state. The permanent civil service, generally, are there for one reason and one reason only. That's to protect the state, not the citizens. They have no interest in the citizens.
Something more could have been done at the time to alert people, because it was known at the time. Just because it didn't affect rabbits doesn't mean it couldn't affect a human being. Yeah, you try not to blame yourself. It was your fault, but it wasn't really. You felt, why did I? If only I hadn't a cold, I didn't need that bloody pill. What did I take it for? You wonder what made you swallow the bloody pill.
It turned out to be a very deliberate decision by the Irish state not to issue a warning to the public. You think of product recalls nowadays, they're bells, whistles, serial numbers, everything. The first mention after that international withdrawal in the newspaper was 1962, months later. It mentions the word thalidomide. It doesn't even refer to one of the biggest brand names, Softenon. They didn't alert the public to the actual trade names, the actual products itself.
I know that in many houses, these pills stayed on the shelf in the bathroom for years. The drug was marketed here as Softenon, that was the name that was used. But it may well have been that because of the practice then that pharmacists would simply give you a little bottle and that it had your name on it and it said your tablets and that was it. It may have been that people didn't even recognise that that was the case, which was why you needed a really, really lively upfront warning system which said, have you ever taken a drug or been advised to take a particular drug for your morning sickness? Don't before you check with your doctor or your pharmacist.
If you were dispensing a medication and you were packing down from a large pack of 1,000 tablets, the real name of the drug wasn't always put on the dispensed label, and it wasn't until the late 70s and into the 80s that actual drug names were always put on the prescription.
So even if somebody was reading, the old evening press, they were reading about thalidomide, but they weren't associating that with what was in their kitchen cupboards. That to me is a very important part of the story, that we now know that a lot of people didn't come forward because they never made that connection with the ingredient versus the name on the package. And you also had the Ireland of the day that people still felt some things were an act of God, and they didn't actually follow through with the cause and effect of what might have been happening in their lives. When we did come forward and people were told to report to the Dublin hospitals for examination, about 102 children came forward, and we know that only 32 children at the time were acknowledged. The knowledge about how thalidomide caused its damage was not even known to those so-called experts in the 60s. And so people fell at that fence and were refused.
The opposite direction. I don't, as I say, they met at a dance. I actually can't remember where they met. But being an unacknowledged, we're in limbo. And I have a few friends, thalidomide family we'll call them, who are unacknowledged, and we're just waiting and waiting. No apology, no acknowledgement, no healthcare package. Zero. My mum, I would have asked her about it a couple of times, particularly when I was maybe 11, 12, 13, when you're getting a bit more aware of yourself, and she would have told me about being at the family doctor and in her early pregnancy and receiving medication, which she took once or twice. I do remember her telling me that the doctor came back out afterwards, after he'd given it to her, and saying to her, I'm not so sure about that. That is one thing I do remember her telling me, that he wasn't 100% sure about it, and she had already taken it. And she had, no evidence or no medical evidence kept, like some people had kept containers, and not everybody had thought of doing that.
Free samples were given to mothers by their local GP. We have many, many stories about this. And then after the tragedy became more commonly known, it's actually quite scary how many GPs denied ever having it or giving it. In the 70s, about 32 people were acknowledged. And as I say, some unacknowledged weren't. The unacknowledged are a huge part of our family. Imagine your mum telling you, your mum going to the trouble of signing an affidavit about how she took Softenon or the other brand names. And that mother now having gone to her grave, knowing nobody listened and nobody believed her.
The sad reality is that as time passes, more and more people in the community are passing away without seeing justice. Just yesterday we got news, sadly, that Elizabeth Sweeney had died without recognition or validation for herself or her daughter Sandra, and I just want to offer my sympathies to her family.
I was honoured to be in the gallery, and Ivana Bacik, a huge supporter of us, mentioned her name, and then our Taoiseach Simon Harris acknowledged her name. And so that mother's name was written into the Dáil records, and it's the only acknowledgement she's ever got, and that was on the day of her funeral. In the early 70s, a court case ran for 4 years in Germany against the manufacturer of the drug, Grunenthal. Grunenthal then, after 4 years, turned around and said, well, we're now going to declare bankruptcy. We can't continue like this. And that brought the court case to an immediate end. And what happened then was the German government, who you must remember were protecting their very, very lucrative pharmaceutical industry in Germany at that time, together with Grunenthal, set up a fund, the Kontergan. Kontergan is a German name for thalidomide fund in Germany. And this was then going to compensate the children who'd been affected worldwide. Obviously then they had to decide, well, who are the children and where are they? The Irish Thalidomide Medical Board came into being at that time, and so people applied.
That was horrific. And we were put through hell at the time. We got over it, that. I just remember about going to Dublin to the train, that was all I can remember. And the pushing and the prodding and the poking. It was horrendous, like. That was the first time, I suppose, I really realised that people out there like them, like myself.
During the horrific examinations, every little bit of an injury was pointed. So maybe the fusing of the arm, or the lack of a thumb, or the absence of ears, the absence of arms. So you got 2 points for something. You got 10 points for a missing ear. You got this, that and the other. And that gave the child a scale from 1 to 100. If you were 0 to 10 points, you got this amount. If you were 10 to 20 points, you got this amount. And all the way up in tens, up to the absolutely catastrophic injuries, up to 100.
At the time, there was an election and a change of government, 1973. And the leader of the Labour Party, Brendan Corish, had promised during that campaign that he would do something about what had happened. And he became Minister for Health, so it was fairly high on his list of priorities to have something done about this.
I know that I was offered and received £1,500 for my disability. And Brendan Corish in 1974, expressing some level of sympathy, went to the Cabinet and they decided that they would award Irish money 4 times what had been awarded in Germany. So I think I got £4,500 from Ireland and £1,500 from Germany. It was about £6,500 that I would have got. It didn't plan for deterioration. It didn't plan for longevity of our lives. I mean, it is actually quite extraordinary that so many of us have survived despite catastrophic disabilities. When we came forward 15 years ago and we first approached Mary Harney, I think we were quite naive, thinking it's now time to address our future lives and how we progress as we age. We asked a very simple question. The laws of the court are that any award to children must be ruled by the courts to ensure that it's a fair settlement for the injuries and protect the children. The Constitution is supposed to protect the children. And suddenly across the table, you could see almost an intake of breath. And they said, we have to come back to you on that one. And within a few days, we realised that actually the awards to the children through our parents had never been ruled by the High Court. This money should have been put into the protection of the court for that child. And that was a huge failure on behalf of the state.
The people who suffered with thalidomide, because they were heroes and workers, they found ways around the disability. But that meant they had to force their bodies into doing things that their bodies were never designed for. And now their bodies are saying, enough already. We can't take any more of this. So they need a radically different kind of compensation. They need it fast and they need it to be generous.
Both the lump sum and the allowance are inadequate for what they are now facing, now that they're older, now that their limbs are suffering from rheumatism and arthritis, limbs that have been asked to do things that they shouldn't ever have been asked to do. And the government needs to face this again.
Do you know, the worst thing about the thalidomide victims is how well they coped. They came from families that were survivors, that helped them, that sent them to school, and they became artists, farmers, a doctor. They were heroes, and that was the worst thing they could have been, because heroes get admired, but they don't get helped.
When we went to Mary Harney and we came forward with sort of like, we need to sit down with you guys. We've lived longer than you thought. We met with such barriers that our antenna just went up.
When you can't understand the reason why something is happening, often it's because there's a deep vested interest. I can only assume it has something to do with leaving yourself open to future financial claims which would hurt the taxpayer.
But you know something? Great political leadership cuts through complications and ignores the possibility of setting precedents and just gets to the simple thing of what is the right thing to do now. I can honestly say that it's the only thing that I've ever actually lobbied on. I went to politicians to say, come on, you have to do something for these people. You have to get an apology for the mothers. And I utterly failed. Utterly failed. I might as well have done nothing. Generation after generation, government after government walked away. They just walked away.
But I'd like to see some resolution to the situation. I think, and I've said the whole time, and I've said this in negotiations, we need proper health care, private care, because public care doesn't work. It can't work. The apology would mean a lot to a lot of people. It wouldn't mean as much to me personally. The first comment I'd make about an apology, where can I cash that? Would be the first question I'd make, like. But that's a personal thing. Now, some people would like it, and if they want it, they're entitled to it.
I personally would like an apology and an acknowledgement for myself. It's too late for my parents to get an acknowledgement and an apology. We haven't got forever. Some of us are more affected than others, and the physical toll as you get older it adds up, and the psychological toll hasn't, I'm sure, been easy for everybody. I would not like to think that I would get an acknowledgement or an apology posthumously. That would be terrible. That would be no good. It'd be too late.
You want to see it in your lifetime?
I want to see it in my lifetime, yeah. Yeah.
I think it's really cruel that a mother would go to her grave and not have a state apology and not be told this was not your fault and we are sorry. And I know that for some of them, it means the world. I accept that apologies get bandied around and they won't mean everything, the same thing to everybody. Some people would feel that this whole thing that has been done to them in their lives is actually unforgivable. And you can more than understand that. But I think, you know, when we were growing up as children, we were all reared to apologise if you did something wrong. It's the right thing to do. It's the polite thing to do. But this deluge of resistance to acknowledging who we are and what they have done to us, it has to stop.
You know, mothers always feel guilty. And in that instance, I could imagine a woman saying, oh, for God's sake, why did I take that bloody drug? You know, how much of this was my fault? And looking at a beloved child struggling, maybe, with achieving what she or he wanted to achieve and feeling that it was your fault, which is why it's almost criminal that those parents, of whom I think there are only a handful left, have not had a public apology and the reassurance that they did nothing wrong.
When you're living your life, you just want your children to have the best possible chance in life. So I'm so glad I was able to talk to Mammy, and I'm so glad that she's still here. They're the people who need the apology. It's the mothers. Because they were robbed. They really were. They were robbed of so much. I mean, I have 2 children myself, and I know, my God, every little ache and pain and anything that goes wrong and you're, you know, and just have to be put through that, through no fault of your own. And nobody faces up to the fact that they've done anything wrong and they don't apologise. And I just think it's total betrayal.
We're holding this press conference today to give our formal response to a letter that we received from the three party leaders on the 5th of July. I want to just address the letter itself. The word apology does not appear in this letter at all. And just about every media outlet and every newspaper and just about everybody else, people stopping all of us on the street, our phones were hopping to say, you've received your apology at last, at last, at last. An expression of general regret is not an apology. An expression of sympathy is not an apology. Saying the mothers of thalidomide babies were not to blame is not an apology. And excluding any reference to our unacknowledged survivors is not an apology. And I'm afraid for those reasons, that's why we are so upset. That's why this falls so short of what we've been campaigning for years.
My mother is Mary Clarkin. Her heart has been beating for the last 94 years. It can't go on beating forever. We have been on a journey together since I was born. A journey which began at my birth when my mother looked down at her newborn baby and asked, why? Why? Because of one single tablet, that's why. And I'm sitting here today demanding a proper apology from the Irish government, who are responsible for what happened then and obviously are not taking enough responsibility for us now. It was a farce. It was just amazing, absolutely amazing. It was, wow, how could anybody even think this up? I mean, really? I just thought to myself, wow, they were trying, it was like as if they were trying to get everything in. Oh, we'll say we're sorry, we'll say this, we'll say, and then we'll give them a bus pass. Insulting. It was just really, really insulting.
If I get a free bus pass, I'd be delirious, wouldn't I? Yeah. Like most of the women were just offered a bus pass. It's rather condescending, really, isn't it? Totally patronising. You can't do that to people. Well, they do. They do.
I thought it was pathetic. It had the air of something that had been nearly hurriedly drafted. The language in it and the sort of weasel words, sympathy, and it is regretful what had happened to you, you know, old pedant that I am. No, it was regrettable what had happened to you. In fact, it was much more than regrettable. But it seemed to me to be such a flabby, flimsy, inadequate response. And I do hope that they think again. It would seem from this that all that's being offered is pretty well the same health package that was offered by Brendan Corish back in 1974. It was utterly inadequate, and I know that the hopes of all the people involved on the side of thalidomide survivors felt their hopes dashed, felt really badly treated and insulted by this statement. So I do hope that they can do better than that.
Well, today's meeting was a very historic occasion. It is the largest number of thalidomide survivors put together in one room for a very long time. We felt that the three leaders engaged with us very well. It was a very honest meeting, a very frank meeting, and an awful lot of the baggage, that goes back a very long way about our lives and our stories was listened to. I think that we are now going to be engaging in a process that's going to move forward in a very constructive way. I know those words get bandied around, but we are very hopeful that this actually is the beginning of the end, and that all our wishes will be taken into consideration and that we will get there. But there is a process to go through now. It will start almost immediately in terms of laying out the rules of that process and how we will do it, and we're ready, and it looks like they might be ready too.
What would a state apology mean for you as a group and for you personally?
I'm hoping it brings me relief. I hope it takes the responsibility of the campaign off my shoulders. I hope for our siblings and all of us who are affected that it means something, and I will be sorry because I know there will be people who won't be able to cope with the apology. It won't be enough, because it's a scales, isn't it? The justification and the apology. I just hope that we all just find some calm. I think that's what we need, is calm. You could end the misery for some of the people rather than let them die never hearing it.
I think it would be huge if they came out and said to the two remaining parents, you did nothing wrong. This was not your fault. And thereby also accepting that, to a certain extent, it was the state's fault. Not wholly. It was Kemi Grunenthal who made the drug, who did not trial it properly, and who put it on the market long before they should have, and then refused to take it off until they were faced with the publicity that they didn't want to get. But listen, at this stage of the game, we're talking, 40 people? I'm a certain age, they're a certain age, we're not going to be around here for that long. Why on earth Simon Harris, a former Minister for Health, doesn't sort this out, get it done? It's 40 people and two remaining parents, and I would have thought it would be a massively honourable thing to do on behalf of the Irish nation.
We're not asking for a lot, we're asking for an apology, an acknowledgement and justice. Just simple justice. Our parents, our mothers didn't do anything wrong. They acted in good faith, and most of those parents are now gone, past. It's too late for them, but don't let us go without an apology.
Simon, show us what you're made of. We're beginning to doubt. See what he does.
This is your time, not to be opportunistic, but to draw a line in the sand, to make an historic statement about rejecting an Ireland that allowed this to happen and then didn't fix it when it did happen.
I always think that there must be more hidden behind the scenes than we realise. Maybe I'm just being kind. Maybe it's just pure laziness on the bureaucrats' part that they sort of say, we don't want to open that file. But I really do think that there's something behind this. There must be, because why would they hold up so long? And also even that letter, it wasn't an apology as such, and it wasn't this, it wasn't that. Again, holding off, trying to pass time again. It's like as if nearly they are waiting for us to die. I don't know when all of this will come out, but there must be something in the deep drawers of the Department of Health that they don't want us to know.
It is truly difficult and to understand why they have had the mindset and they've taken the action they have over the last 60 years. We've seen so many other schemes, larger groups, and yet everybody can see the evidence that we have on this tragedy. And you would wonder, is there more there? Is there more culpability? Is the withholding of all the documents hiding something? I really hope when the Taoiseach gets to investigate this and comes back to us, that he has some answers for us on that. And it really is a David and Goliath story. We, on occasion, have to attend court, and there is the group of us, shoulder to shoulder, sitting on the hard benches, desperately trying to get earphones from the court services because we can't actually hear with all our disabilities what's going on. And we have our barrister and our lawyer, and maybe one other, and then on this side, you have all the state solicitors, all the Grunenthal's solicitors, the TP Wheelahan solicitors, and all their legal teams, and they spill over, and we sort of are shifting up. It's actually, it's quite extraordinary to see the weight they have put behind their defence, and it does beg the question, why?
Mammy has prepared a letter for An Taoiseach.
Yeah, everybody knows that healing only properly begins with an apology. Even 60 years of trauma can be erased by a heartfelt sorry. To refuse one is to extend the trauma, the hurt, the feeling of exclusion indefinitely. Mary Clarkin.